I've been moving a bit slower recently, but I haven't been procrastinating. I've just had to prioritize other work over my personal studies. And my species studies require a lot of time, so I have to work on other projects most of the time these days. But I still wanted to continue, and because of that, I worked on this page of bird species in the meantime. In my last study, I spent a lot of time immersed in the world of forget-me-nots. I remember how much I struggled with the deceptively simple five-petaled stars of the Myositis genus, how the repetition of those tiny blue flowers required a level of patience I wasn't quite expecting. But that study taught me something vital, how a small delicate form can carry immense historical and emotional weight. So this time I'm moving away from the scorpion grass and the tragic legends of medieval knights to look at something much more grounded and structural. I've chosen some species which are the heavy-bodied ground-feeding birds we often know as quails, partridges, and spurfowl or francolin. While the forget-me-nots were about rhythm and soft calming colors, this study is about visual library building through anatomy, camouflage, and silhouette. I've chosen a selection of species that I find particularly inspirational: quails, partridges, snowcocks, and spurfowl. When I was drawing the forget-me-nots, I was focused on how to make a page look like a vintage botanical book. I wanted to capture that gentle presence. With these birds, I'm still aiming for that naturalist's aesthetic, but my internal goal has shifted. I'm looking at these species as blueprints for creature design. Maybe in the future I will create monsters, but most likely I want to create animals that feel like they evolved in a real ecosystem. To do these kinds of things, I need to understand the morphology of real-life survivors. These birds are perfect for this because they are masters of their environments, from the scorching deserts of the Sand Partridge to the freezing heights of the Tibetan Snowcock. I started with the quails. If you ever seen a common quail or king quail, you know they are essentially feathered teardrops. They have this incredibly compact egg-shaped silhouette, and that is a goldmine for character design. For example, when I drew the king quail, I'm struck by the color blocking, the deep royal blues and rich chestnut reds that are so saturated compared to the dusty browns we usually associate with game birds. In my previous study, I had to work hard to keep the blue tones of the forget-me-nots from feeling flat. Here the challenge was different. I'm looking at how the blue-breasted feathers transition into the warm oranges and reds. This study became much more about texture, like spots on dark feathers that create a complex shimmering pattern, much like the repetition of the forget-me-not blooms. Drawing these feathers required immense focus. However, while the flowers were about soft rhythm, these feathers are about layering, and I'm making these studies mostly as quick sketches with color, so I'm not always accurate with all the textures or patterns of these birds. For example, in some of these birds, the way the stripes on the flanks follow the curve of the heavy body, and it helps me understand form. If I can wrap a pattern around the bird's wing correctly, it takes time, but it teaches me how to do that, and it's all about understanding how 2D patterns interact with 3D volumes. So every time I sit down to make these studies, I feel like it's building the visual library, but also training myself in drawing and painting. Of course, the visual library part have been my focus. I've realized that just looking at reference images was never enough for me. When I just look, I can forget, but when I draw, the information becomes a part of me. So in the past, my first instinct when drawing a flower used to be a basic daisy, but after the studies, I think of other shapes. Now, when I think about drawing a bird or a small monster, I don't just draw a generic pigeon shape. I can think about the sturdy, scratching legs of the Grey Partridge or the low, slung, secretive posture of the Sand Partridge. I want to be able to draw a variety of things from imagination, but the road to imagination is paved with these real-life studies. Now I'm learning the morphology of the groundbird. I'm learning how the beak of a seed-eater differs from a predator. I'm learning how a bird's weight is distributed when it stands on a rocky slope. For me, these are essential things to learn, so when I get to concept art and world building, maybe I want my world to have its own land birds, perhaps not birds exactly, but creatures that will fill that same ecological niche. By studying these real species, I'm learning how to name my own creations. I love the common names I found in the study. Spurfowl, snowcock, sand partridge, they describe the bird's weapons, its habitat, or its behavior. It gives me a framework for how people in a fantasy world would name their animals they encounter. Just as the forget-me-not is a symbol of memory and loss, I can imagine these birds as symbols in my world. Maybe the crimson-headed partridge is a sign of an approaching storm, or the snowcock is considered a guardian of the mountain passes. So the process of drawing these species has been a blend of observation and analysis in a world of fast AI images and instant photos. Taking some time to paint feathers or scales feels like a quiet rebellion, but here are my illustrations of all these different birds: the common quail, the king quail, the yellow-necked spurfowl, the painted spurfowl, the sand partridge, the crimson-headed partridge, the grey partridge, and the Tibetan snowcock. I'm hoping it's an effective method for learning. I know it cements the details in my memory, and I encounter challenges like how to show the depth of the wing without making it look messy, and solving those challenges I hope will make me better in drawing, but also imagining new things or design. I'm still at the start of this journey, adding new things to my visual library every day. Whether it's the delicate blue of a Haematortyx or the sturdy camouflaged feathers of a bird, each page I finish is a building block. I hope to eventually compile all these studies into a book of some sort, a personal encyclopedia maybe, of both the real world and the one that I'm dreaming of building in my head. So documenting these illustrations and the knowledge I gain along the way helps me remember these better. So I hope this study was as interesting for you to watch as it was for me to draw. I hope I'll see you soon for the next species study.